Hello, beautiful souls. Thank you for joining me. Today, I wanted to have a sit down, relaxed as possible conversation about racism, diversity, equality, and my spiritual perspective on Black Lives Matter. For some reference, not that it's always needed or important, but for some reference, I am a white queer cis woman. I pride myself on being informed and kind to myself and others and constantly doing inner work and exploration, but my words will not be perfect, even though I am a medium and channel from higher realms and attitudes at times, as I am blessed to do. That won't make my words perfect. So I encourage you, if you hear something that you have a perspective on, that you can respectfully share and we can all broaden each other's perspectives, please absolutely share that in the comments. I am always open to that with love and understanding. So with that being said, I wanted to speak on a little bit of the spiritual perspective first, of where we are in our history. See, already throat chakra stuff. In my spiritual perspective and opinion, we're currently in a place and a time where even the astrology is showing us that Saturn activity is very similar at this moment in time, but this video is timeless, so whenever you're watching it, it will be right and appropriate for your soul and timeline. But the Saturn activity at the moment is very reflective and mirroring of Saturn activity that was going on in the 1990s during the Rodney King riots, and that was going on in the 1960s during the Civil Rights Movement. Of course, astrology affects the globe and affects all of us, and this video is not just about America, but as I am in the country of America and as America is leading the change right now, that's primarily what we're going to be speaking on and focusing on. So at this moment, of course, we have the Black Lives Matter movement. We have protests and rioting. I would advise you to be aware that the media is, of course, biased and, of course, telling a biased story and narrative. And the media almost always feeds upon fear. Especially the news. It feeds and drives upon fear and confusion and control. And as a people and as a species, we are most controllable when we are in the lower vibrational frequencies of hurt and of fear and of confusion. And so I would advise you, when you're consuming media, be aware of the bias, be aware of the emotions that it's trying to elicit or play off of within you, and take things with a grain of salt. Do your research. Speak to people. That's the most important thing. And of course, we are more connected than ever. We have this internet, we have this interwebs where we're able to be connected with anyone at any time in any part of the globe, with as little editing or bias as possible, and we're able to educate ourselves on a whole variance of perspectives without the editing of media. So be aware of that and view other people's perspectives rather than the news or the news media as much as you can. Be aware that it's totally normal to have a response and a reaction of fear and upset and unrest in response to the unrest of a riot or even of a protest. If you're here, you're most probably an empath or a highly sensitive person or someone attune or akin to energy in some sense, and it's absolutely normal for those things to get to you. What this time is also greatly about is the ability to cleanse and filter our energy, shield it from the harmful things. We can see through the shield to the things that are harmful, but we're learning not to let them get to us so much that we can't actually stand in our power and do something about it. And protesting and rioting does get the attention and start the change in a lot of cases, right? I mentioned that I'm a part of the LGBT family. Of course, that movement and our rights, which we are still fighting for, but that movement that we've made great strides in did start with a riot at Stonewall. It did start when people had had enough of the mistreatment and stood in their emotions for a moment and showed the other side what it looks like when you lose control, but then when you also stand in your power and when you maintain an energy frequency of being in your power, which in my opinion, you can't do if you let yourself be too much of a bleeding heart, or if you don't inhabit some forms of some self-care and some shielding and cleansing and filtering processes, of some replenishing of yourself and of your energy processes, so that you don't burn out on the movement or whatever it is you're trying to change, and you don't give your power away to the other side by constantly catering to or giving into the hurt or fear and cycling in that, rather than using it to elicit the change, notice what needs to be changed, and then start the healing and step out of it. So what we're seeing now is the petering off a bit of some of the Black Lives Matter movement, because people get confused. They're not sure what to do next. And also people start to burn out because they're not taking their healthy breaks. They're not being in their time of self-charge and recharge. They're not being in balance of what they need for them and to take care of their emotions, and then what they can contribute to the movement. And this is about long-term and consistent healing and change. This is not about a one-off. This does not stop when we get one law put in place. The discrimination and the inequality mindsets don't end because we get the government to recognize us and our perspective and our movement. And I'm sorry if it triggers you that I say us, but I do hold this as a family movement and a family matter in my soul, even though I understand that it's not my skin's fight. It is part of my soul's fight and mission to stand with people that I love. While I also brought up the astrology, I want to circle back to that to remind the fact that this astrology served as a catalyst in these times that came before now and in this time that's coming now, to try to help us to see what needs to be changed. Saturn activity means karma. It means noticing karma. It means paying back karma. It means rebalancing karma. It means being repaid by karma. And the problem with racism, and especially systemic racism, in this country and throughout the world, is that it's gone largely under the rug or under the radar. People aren't willing to take it into account as a whole. People aren't willing to hit it from all sides, right? As a healer, I work with myself and with others to hit things from a physical perspective, but also from a spiritual and mental and emotional perspective, to see where things are coming at us from the past and be willing to notice and love on and validate and heal and clear those things and purge them, once and for all, so that we're never reacting from those past wounds, and we're never subconsciously manifesting or creating from those past wounds or programming. And in my opinion, America especially, but yes, also the world at large, has not done this, has not hit it from all sides, has carried so much of the guilt and shame of this, or so much of the invalidation of this wound of racism, of slavery, of inequality, of non-diversity, and of white and Caucasian supremacy, that it's not allowed for the healing. It's not allowed for the payback of this karma, right? And that's why the astrology is helping us. And that's why you'll notice in your own life, we cycle up in lessons. We cycle up in the paying of karma. You know, even when you've cleared one person that's a karmic person from your life, if you haven't fully paid that karma or learned that lesson, you'll attract back another situation or another person that's very similar to the one before. And that's what the astrology is showing us. You know, that is why we can look back at these former protests and these former riots and these quotes of our tremendous civil rights leaders, and they feel so similar. They're hauntingly similar to now, and it should not be that way decades and decades later, you know, but it is, because we're not willing to look at the entirety of the problem, and we're not willing to face it and own up to it and say, how have I hurt you? What are all the ways that I've hurt you? Let me look at that and face that and not sweep it under the rug. And yes, let's not continue to mire in it and cycle in it and use it. Let's look at it and address it and see what we really need to do about it, because just a law isn't enough. Just a monetary reparations payment isn't enough. You know, whenever you try to pay back karma with just one thing and just one part of the picture, it's never going to be paid. It's always going to cycle back around. So we can't do this just with money. We can't do this just with laws. We have to continually do this with healing and with speaking to each other and sharing with each other and dropping the defensiveness and the hurt as much as possible by addressing it, addressing that it's there, seeing when those things are no longer serving, but not invalidating them. You know, we don't validate the defensiveness and the hurt and the anger and the fear to keep it going, but we acknowledge that it's there, and we heal it and purge it and release it and overcome it with love, so that we can all step up to the higher and higher forms of healing, the higher and higher forms of emotion, of change, of reciprocity, of reciprocation, and of repayment and healing of this karma once and for all, so that we don't have to continue to attract tragedies and upsets and murders and crimes and unrest and protest in order to get the attention of ourselves and each other and our system and our societies and our governments to change it and heal it on every level once and for all, so that there's no sandbag of baggage that anyone is carrying anywhere that's going to rear its ugly head at any moment. My mission of doing that the most, first and foremost, and other forms of activism and of healing and of repayment are absolutely important, but my main mission and perspective, the one that I've been constantly channeling and sending energy to, is bias, is subconscious bias and racism, because I know that even scientifically and statistically, it is backed, all of my spiritual beliefs, the fact that our subconscious and our subconscious programming is capable of running 95% of our brain and of our show and of our lives and of our manifesting, if we let it, and until we change it and until we notice it, we have no power over it whatsoever. until we acknowledge it and stop invalidating it or stop being defensive of it, because it has ego and it has a built-in defensive mechanism. Until we dismantle that, we have no power over the subconscious bias that can be ruling or, at the very, very least, influencing our life and our behavior and our creations and our conversations and our culture and our treatment of ourselves and others. So that's my main goal, and that's my main mission, is helping bring to the awareness in others and in myself where we have these subconscious biases. Yes, noticing where they were put in place, but trying to step out of the blame factor of where society or culture or our families even have put this in place, noticing where it's been put in place, but stepping out of the blame element so that we're not giving the power to them anymore. We're taking it back within us. Yes, you may have put this here, just like somebody else may have hurt you. Yes, somebody else may have hurt you, and that's on their karma. That's their responsibility. But your responsibility is your element of the healing. It's your factor. It's not taking blame for what happened and what was done to you, but it's what you do with it now. Now that that hurt is a part of you, the karma of how it was done is on the other person. But your ability to heal it and get through it, that's on you and your higher power. And you do have the power over that. You do not have to continually give the power to your abuser or your programmer by cycling in the blame or in the hurt or in the upset. You get to step out of that pattern and get to step into the healing. And that's what I want us all to do together. That's why it's going to be a longer road than any mass donation and monetary repayment. It's going to be a longer road than any just getting of the laws, right? We know this because the civil rights movement got us some of the laws, not all of the laws still. There's some misinformation that there are full protections out there, because there are not. Even in America at this moment, we still don't have a fully ratified ERA, Equal Rights Amendment, that the women of every color in this country started in the 60s and 70s and 80s. We still don't have that fully on the books as a ratified part of our Constitution, which is a shock to a lot of people, but it's still not there. And so that's why it's important to notice those things. Stop sweeping them under the rug with assumption. Stop sweeping them under the rug with privilege, right? If you have the privilege not to know what it's like to live in fear or bias of the government or the police, don't sweep under the rug the fact that others don't have that privilege. Be willing to notice it and do your part to balance it. Even if your part is just having conversations with people. Just having conversations makes a huge difference. If you're not an activist, if you're not a protester, if you're not a petition signer, if you don't have the money to donate, that's okay. If that's not your role in this, and I encourage everybody to really deep dive on what their roles are. And most of us do have more than one. But if all you can contribute right now is a conversation and an openness to listen to someone else and to speak up maybe for somebody else, that's okay. And if you can't do that yet, the one most important thing that I encourage you to do, please, 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 everyone should do this no matter what your role is. Please start with yourself. Start inside. Start looking inward. You are a co-creator of the reality and the world you experience, right? That is a spiritual belief, but it is also a physical and logical belief. You're contributing to society in some form. That's a logical thought. You don't have to have spiritual belief to believe this. if you work on you, just your perspective, your energy, where you may have some bias, that can be a monumental change. In my belief, it influences the energy. It influences the energy around us. It influences how much energy we're able to contribute and inspire and influence and experience. That is a monumental change to me. If everybody just takes accountability for their energy and their mindset and what they have from their ancestral mindset and karma and what they have from themselves now and how they can contribute to going forward instead of perpetuating a backward negative cycle, that makes a huge energetic difference on this planet. That gives each of us and the collective of light so much power. That's what I believe in. But if you don't believe in that yet, if you just believe that just doing some reflection maybe helps you make a small difference in how you look at or treat or react to someone else, you honestly never know how big of a change that could make. You never know. That person that you treat differently and with more respect because you took ownership of your bias, that could be the next civil rights leader. That could be the next lawyer that elicits the change. You never know. And that's why taking accountability for ourselves is so important, because the laws themselves will never do it. They will give people a framework to want to do it and think that they should do it, but that in itself will never do it. And you don't have to take my word on it, it's proven. We had these laws come into play with the civil rights movement in these protests and riots and marches through the 1960s. Have they changed much? Have they changed everything? Certainly not. You can't tell me, no matter how far right or how disbelieving you are of this, you cannot tell me that those rights changed everything. You can't, there's no way you can tell me that. And that's because laws alone will never do it. Excuse me, more throat chakra clearing and passion. This is an unedited channeling and transmission of a lot of thoughts I have and a lot of downloads I've been getting from spirit and in prayer. Because it's up to us. It's not up to the law. It's up to the people to uphold the law. And that's another discussion too, right? It's not up to the police. It's really, really not. If we give our power to them, it's still not up to them, because the people will always outnumber the police. So it's about how we choose to live in a society, how we choose to balance the power and respect the laws, and what laws we agree on that are supposed to be, aren't always, but are supposed to be for the protection and the balance and the stability of all in a society. That's why it has to be equal. That's why it has to be unbiased. And that's why the systemic imbalance has to stop. That's why doing this inner work of noticing where we have subconscious racial bias, each one of us doing that inner work, helps influence our families, helps influence the lawmakers, and God help us if they do it. Oh my God, if they do it, and if they just write and carry out the law without that bias, that's what stops the systemic injustice and inequality and bias. It's not only about villainizing the government and the people in power. And there's a whole separate energy discussion that we could have about who's truly in power and why they're in power and what their motives are. But it's almost irrelevant at this point, because people only have power if you continually give in to them and feed them. And I want to encourage you. I don't want to discourage people from protesting. That's absolutely your right. Using your voice is absolutely your right. And I apologize if any of my bias has made it seem like that. My mission is not to discourage people from protesting. My mission is to help people feel empowered as they're protesting and help the protests contribute to positive change as opposed to contribute to more unrest and more hurt and more danger and more feeding of the fear and of the negative systems, right? Because there is an energy where people can think that they're fighting for the change, but if they're standing in and contributing to all hurt and fear and the lower vibrational energies, as opposed to using that hurt and fear to galvanize them in their own power and band and join together in power. If they're not doing it empowered and only doing it out of expression of hurt and fear and frustration because they're not also doing their self-work and self-care and balancing, then the energy of that protest, which is often what leads to a riot, besides the fact of the infiltrators that are causing some of the riots that have nothing to do with this, that energy is actually feeding the oppressor. Much the same as those people who want to ignore it and stand by in complicity and complacency. That's also feeding the oppressor. Ignorance feeds the oppressor and the people in power who misuse it, and fear. Make no mistake, whether you believe in the spiritual things that I believe in and energy or not, fear absolutely feeds them because they play off of it. They use it to galvanize their side. They use it to control the people that are standing in the hurt and fear. And that's why each one of us has the ability and has the divine right and connections to learn, and it's different process for everyone because everyone has the right to grieve. Everyone has the right to be fearful and to grieve the loss and the hurt and the terror and the injustice. And grieving absolutely has stages of anger and of unrest and of fear. But everyone is responsible for their own grieving process, and to not push that grieving process onto others or allow that grieving process to let them or the movement be controlled and construed and used for ways that I know that they don't intend it to be used. No one intends to be used. Nobody wants to be used. But that's why it's my job, in my perspective and my mission, to help people see where they're being used and help people see where their subconscious is leading them, where their hurt is leading them, what that's actually feeding, and how those things aren't feeding what they actually want, and how we can all take that power back from the negative things that we're feeding, from the subconscious that we're continuing to contribute to as opposed to learn from and step out of, how we can take that power back and how we can move forward, finally, please. So no matter which side of the fence you sit on, if you sit on a privileged side of the fence, and your only role in this is looking at your subconscious and internal bias, which primarily will be if you're not in the person of color communities that are dealing with this most heavily, or if you're a person of color and you're hurting, honestly and rightfully so, and you have fear, it's my job to help all of us see the ways through that, see the ways to step out of those patterns and heal them and move forward. And I encourage you, even if you're a person of color, please also be willing to look at your internal bias, because we all have it. We all have it. Our families put it on us. We carry it as our ancestral trauma, which is not only a spiritual thing like I do, that's a scientific thing too. Scientists are finding ways where the DNA holds on to the trauma, right? People whose families have been through war, people whose families have been through slavery, oppression of all kinds, in every country. That carries on until someone has the courage to notice that discomfort, sit with it, see where it's coming from, and change it. Heal it. Feel it. Yes, absolutely. Feel it. Feel the ways that it's been impacting you in ways that you haven't wanted and, yes, don't deserve. But the way we step out of what we don't deserve and step into what we are worth, and we're all worth, stepping out of what's been put on us and into our power and into what we are worth and what we want, is we notice first and foremost. We notice, we recognize, we acknowledge, we don't dismiss, we don't repress. We notice it and we stop the victim mentality and the blaming, because that doesn't get anyone anywhere. Holding people accountable for justice and giving them their part of the karma is different than blaming or shaming and keeping yourself as well as the other person. But honestly, it's more yourself in that mode and in that cycle of lower vibrational frequencies of blame and of shame and of guilt. And as we keep ourselves or each other trapped in that guilt and shame with dismissal or repression, we will never rise out of it. We will never rise out of it because it will always be there playing in the background in that subconscious and internal track somewhere. And even if we're the strongest we could be, and we don't let it affect most of our behavior and most of how we live, it will still affect something. It will come out somehow, some way. And it may infect someone else. It may be the hurt that tips somebody else over the edge. Or, at the very, very least, you're passing it on. You're passing it on, even if it's a repressive, recessive gene. Even if you don't see how it affects your child or the people that come after you. Recessive genes, this is science and spirit, my passion, has the ability to come back up and come back around at any time. And that's why we're the ones who take the responsibility. We're the ones who notice it and shut it down now. And it may take more generations to do this. Just quite honestly, it may. Because all healing is a process of layers. But somebody's got to start. Somebody's got to say, yeah, we didn't take everything into account before. We're going to do that now. We're going to do that now. And nobody can carry everything. And that's why, like I said before, find out where your role, where your service best fits. And always balance that with yourself and your inner work and your self-work. Because if you're just putting to one end of the scale, it's not enough. It's not balanced. It's not contributing to a balanced life and a balanced society. You know, I know this from my work as a healer and as a light worker and some of the terms that we like in my community. If you're just putting everything into service and you're putting yourself in depletion, it's not balanced. It won't sustain. It's going to make you sick, and it's not giving in service everything you can anyway. And it's not letting the change that you want and crave and are missioned for and want to perform in service, it's not letting that change go very far. That's why it's about the balance of both. Doing my inner work and then sharing in service what I can. I've sat with a lot of this. I've done a lot of this myself. I'm still doing it because all life and all healing is cycles of doing it. I don't believe we're ever done with our healing. You know, we can absolutely be done with the lesson. And I pray that we come to this end of the lesson with racism very, very soon. But don't give up on healing and on balancing, because that's a continual process. It's never going to be stagnant. As long as you're alive and as long as society is alive, it's never going to be stagnant. So please try to notice where you have any bias. Like I was saying, whether you're a Caucasian person or a person of color, this is where we start. We're all going to have different bias. In the people of color communities, in countries throughout the world, we have been imparted also with shadeism. You can tell me I'm wrong, but I've experienced this with loved ones of color. And I know that it persists, even in jokes. Jokes keep something going. Sarcastic jokes keep that energy going instead of stopping it and saying, hey, that's wrong. You know, there are still children all around the world who have some form of color and melanin in their skin and are made to feel that it is wrong. They're made to feel that their level of shade of color is wrong. That they should stay out of the sun to stop from getting too dark. That they're prettier if they're lighter. That's the consensus in most countries and in most communities of color. There is a consensus energy of that. And thankfully it's changing. Thankfully every generation it changes a bit. You know, people self-love on themselves and then spread that self-love, and that's what's changing it. But until we're all noticing it and acknowledging it and stop pretending that it doesn't exist, it's not going to fully change. Why the hell does that matter? Why the hell does the level of pigment in someone's skin determine how beautiful they are and how worthy they are and how intelligent they are? The truth is it doesn't. We scientifically and physically know this. It makes no difference in intelligence, in health, in love, in empathy, in compassion, in any of the things that matter. Beauty is subjective. That will always be subjective. You know, that will never have a scale because it's going to be in the eye of the beholder. But the more of us that speak out, that we find ourselves and everyone beautiful, that's what changes things, and that's what changes the perspective of the eye of the beholder. I encourage you to do your self-love work. And if you see that hurt in someone who's been taught by their family or their society or their culture that their coloration makes a difference in their beauty and their self-worth, see what you can do about that. Don't put people down by acting like it's your job to make a difference in that. It's your job to change your perspective and change how you treat people. That is your primary job, always, first and foremost. It's your job to change how you are as a friend, as a parent, in whatever your job or in society is. That's your job. I don't want to see people go into the other element of having good intentions, but then actually putting people down or throwing people's hurts in their face. That's not my intention. I don't want that to happen. But that's why we all always have to start with our inner work and our inner perspectives. And we also have to be willing to drop the shield of defensiveness and admit where we are wrong, admit where we have a bias, admit where we don't have a perspective that we haven't yet had the ability to have, and somebody else's perspective helps enlighten us. And I can share my perspective as much as possible, but it's also by my entire life trying and striving to educate myself with the perspectives of others of every culture that I could find and resonate with, you know, that helps me share what I hope is a more balanced perspective and what I continually strive to rebalance and grow and enlighten. And that's all of our job. Listen to somebody else. Listen to something else. We all have this resource of the internet now. You don't have to go to the library anymore. Nobody has to know what you're looking up or reading anymore. If you're in a family that's extremely racist and you want to tiptoe into research and into perspective raising, you can do that, through the internet without people knowing what you're doing until you're strong enough to stand in it and stand up to those people around you in a safe way. I applaud the children that are doing this and standing up to their parents and having the conversations, but I also recognize that I don't want anyone to be unsafe. Please don't start a conversation if you feel that you don't have enough support for you to be safe. Support in yourself and in your position, or in who's ever around you, if you have someone around you. Unfortunately, we just saw the lives of more Black trans people lost because they were alone, and we don't know what happened. But I don't want people to feel like they have to so much have the conversation in an environment where they're not safe yet. Change your perspective, work on yourself, change your environment, and then have the conversations where you can do so in some element of a safe and supportive way. Losing more people is not going to help. So that's why I give that little disclaimer there, because I'm so happy and proud to see videos of these children standing up to their parents and holding them accountable. And I've always done that. My family's fought with me my entire life, because I'll hold every one of you accountable. You're going to have a racist joke, I'm going to call you on it. That's just who I am. You're going to try to say a racist word or perspective in my house, it's not going to go unnoticed. I'm going to say something. It's just who I've always been. And that's what we need. We need the people like that, because that's what stops the things from being pushed under the rug. So I'm so proud to see people having these conversations and speaking out. That's what helps the perspective raising. That's what helps us address the bias and end it. But if you can't do that because you're in maybe an abusive family or alcoholic family, or there's some element where you're not safe, or if you're alone in a place full of racists, maybe that's not the time, because I don't want to see any more people lost. That's why we do our inner work and then stand together and then contribute together and then have the support together. So, gosh, thank you for hanging in there with me in this talk. I hope it's galvanizing for you. I hope it's perspective raising for you. I hope that you share it. I've had a lot of talks in the past few weeks, especially with family members and some people that they're used to me calling them on this stuff. And my main thing also has been calling them on dropping the defensive. Most people in my family will say, I'm not racist. And the next thing out of their mouth is, I have such and such friends. I've always had such and such friends. I grew up in X neighborhood where it was pretty diverse and blah, blah, blah. How many times in my LGBT community we hear that when we come out to someone, and the mostly not harming out of their mouth will be, oh, that's nice, good. I have such and such LGBTQ relative, neighbor, friend, blah, blah, blah. Because there's this shame and defensive element that feels like we have to justify, right? That's part of the ego, that's part of the fear, and that's part of the built-in subconscious programming that wants to defend the old pattern and the old mindsets and the old habits. And just constantly addressing that and noticing it and breaking down that wall allows us to see what's really behind it, what we're carrying from our ancestors, what we're carrying from our family's perspective, right? From growing up and seeing any bias or injustice put upon us or our families. And noticing it and healing it and take accountability for it and stopping it. And the defensiveness stops that process. The trying to justify the other way proves that that energy is still alive somewhere. Because if you're really in your self-worth and if you're really okay with something, You don't have that tendency to justify it. You don't have that tendency to try to prove it. You don't have to say to the other person, if you have no uncomfortability in yourself, the next word out of your mouth doesn't have to be a defense of you or a proof of you that you're not racist or that you're not unequal or that you don't hold bias against whoever that person is. Because you're so much in your worth of it that speaks for you and that proves it. And how you are to the other person proves it. This also does go to the wound of self-worth. How much self-worth do we have? Do we have programming that we've always had to prove ourselves? And that can be separate, but it can also be together, with this wound. So notice when you're doing that, and it can be a very human process to want to prove ourselves. And it can cause us anxiety not to prove ourselves. It can cause us stress. But being willing to end that pattern and step out of that and admit our faults and weaknesses to ourselves, first and foremost. And then to the other people. This is my fault, this is my bias, but I'm working on it and I'm healing it. And not having to always say that either and deep dive into how we're working on it and healing it, because explanation can be approving and that can be a lack of self-worth, and we don't need to do that. We need to be it. We need to be it. And we can. But we need to have the conversations with ourselves, with our higher power, and then with other people. We can each take the responsibility for this. We can. We can stop saying, I'm not racist, or it doesn't affect me, or on the other side, for a person of color, we can stop living in the fear element of it, or the pushing it down. We can finally acknowledge the hurt. And it's not that it doesn't also hurt for us in the non-people of color communities, because it does. Most of us in this day and age love people of color, love them as our partner, as our friends, as our family. Thankfully the world is becoming more and more integrated and mixed. So we absolutely can have a hurt in this. We absolutely have a dog in this fight. And especially if you're empathic, your heart absolutely can and will bleed for this. But it's about recognizing that it's a different level of hurt. And so we have a different responsibility as non-members of color who are invested in this. Some of us have more karma and more ancestral karma to pay back than others. And like I said, it's going to be more than money. It's going to be healing. Absolutely, if you can donate money, yes, please do. Because in my opinion, there is a cosmic reparations process. And I'm sorry if that word is triggering, because I know it has so much negative connotation. But the country is finally galvanizing to physically donate and pay back and build up businesses that were not allowed to start in balance, and businesses and families and causes that have been inherently imbalanced because of the fact that there was a monetary karmic debt on the Black community as well, in my opinion. And that wasn't paid back. And so that is why we are seeing the donations happening, and rightfully so, pouring in. And whoever can contribute like that, thank you. That's wonderful. I have some percentage contribution donation things that'll be in the bio, if you're drawn to that and able. And that is one part. It's one piece of the pie. It's not the only thing. And if we get focused on the one thing, it's not going to change everything. Just like if we only focus on the laws, it's not going to change everything. Because it hasn't before. There were some much smaller acts of reparations and paybacks and grants and things that have happened monetarily, to try to monetarily pay back some of the Black community from what we as white people in this country stole from them. Not my ancestors, because they weren't here yet, but that doesn't matter. As white people who still live off of the privilege in this country, we're still building on that foundation and contributing to that, even if it's not a part of our ancestral line and karma. And that's why it's still our job to stand up for other people and diversity and equality. But yeah, like I was saying, there were some smaller efforts that were tried to be made in terms of a monetary payback, but they didn't go very far because it was one piece and it wasn't enough, and it was very, very biased in terms of how it was rolled out. It wasn't done from the heart. And whenever you give money from the heart, especially when you try to do it for karma payback, or if like you owe someone, that money's going to burn out. It's not going to go far. It's not going to do things. Not going to do what it should if it's not given from the heart. That's why the donations of the heart, if you're able and called, that's what's important. That's what goes far. That's what helps. Not because you have to, because you can, because you're called to. And building on the laws that we have in play, seeing where we need more, seeing where we need laws against the bias and against the other side, seeing where we need to hold everyone accountable equally. Seeing where we don't do that, acknowledging where we don't do that. That's going to be a big piece. Doing it from the heart again. Doing it from the heart and not from the fear. Not from the fear of feeling like people are only doing it because of that. That's why the protests that are happening in love and meditation and solidarity, those are my favorite. That's what I believe in the most. I believe people have the right to the other. I don't believe people have the right to hurt each other because of a hurt that was done to them. That's passing on a negative cycle, and I don't like that. That's why I don't agree with the burning and the looting. I understand it. I feel for those people that are drawn to do that. I hate to see the other side that is contributing to that and trying to infiltrate and control the narrative and situation to that. But that's why I believe in doing things in balance and trying to deep dive on ourselves and self-care and heal on ourselves so that we can do it from the right energy, so that we can move forward in the right energy. That's why I believe the biggest piece of this pie and the biggest thing that contributes to change, keep talking about it. Keep talking to yourself and your families and doing your healing and your inner work. I'm proud to do that with people. If you need help in it, check the description and things. We can talk about it. I have an ancestor's prayer and things that I'll also have coming out and I'll link. But everyone's process with this is going to be individual. Everyone's process is important, and it's so important to not let this burn out and die out and need to attract it again. We do not need to attract this again. This is an opportunity. We are more awakened and connected than we've ever been before, and this is the opportunity and the time to change. We change inside, and then we inspire each other and we inspire the change outside. So I love you. I thank you for changing and healing with me, changing yourself and changing the world, being part of the change that we want to see, truly living it and not letting it die by needing to repress it or push it under the rug. Let's find healthy ways to address the hurt and the fear and the anger and the sadness, and let's galvanize that and be empowered by it. Let's not let it control us any longer or control our communities any longer, or let others control us or keep hurting us or our sisters and brothers by contributing our energy to keeping the hurting alive. We end it by ending the racism within us on every level, and we end it by healing and rebalancing the hurt. We can do it together. I believe in us, I believe in you, and I thank you for being here and send you so much love and light. Please leave a comment. Let's talk. Let's share perspectives. Share this with someone you think will benefit. And I will see you next time. Check the links for more. Sending love and light always, always. And belief. Love Danielle, #Damsel, @D's Enlightened Edits.